Acts 9, verses 1 through 20. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength.
Jeremy and I used to like to do puzzles pre-kids because it's hard to do puzzles when you have toddlers running around. But we used to like to sit and watch TV and do puzzles, and we were never very good at it. It wasn't like a top skill of ours, but we did like to do it, and I think we put together like 2 puzzles before we gave up. And we gave up because we put together a puzzle of, I think it was a tractor, maybe like a John Deere tractor or something. We put together the puzzle and we got to the very end of the puzzle, and you know what happened. There was a piece missing. 1,000-piece puzzle, and all we ended up with was 999. Now, in the grand scheme of things, one missing puzzle piece was not really that big of a deal. It didn't ruin the picture. You knew it was in the middle somewhere, so you had to really look to even find that the picture was missing. But it just was so that disorganization of the puzzle, the inability to complete the task, the way that the picture wasn't totally complete was just so frustrating that we really stopped putting puzzles together. Now, I don't know what your puzzle strategy is, but you do the edges first and then you fill in the middle. And I always have to have the picture of the lid propped up somewhere so I can see it while we're doing it. And it doesn't really, it helps, but it's not required. You don't have to have the picture because you can put the puzzle pieces together without knowing exactly where they fit in the picture, especially if they're an edge piece. But I like to have that picture because it helps you to know what you're aiming for, what your final product is going to be. It helps you to know how much closer are you getting and what's the relative position of this puzzle piece in this picture frame. And I kind of wish that we could plan for the future in the same way. Now, life is not like a jigsaw puzzle. It's never going to have a perfect picture that we can follow. We're never going to have the lid of the picture of the finished puzzle propped up while we're putting our puzzle pieces together. And in the puzzle pieces that are our lives, the finished puzzle that is our life, there's always going to be a few pieces of the picture missing. There's always going to be parts of our picture that are not perfect. We're going to get to our life, end of our lives, and look back and realize that there are pieces that will always be missing. But that doesn't mean that they're not beautiful. They may be imperfect, they may be broken, there may be pieces lost, but even in the imperfection of those puzzles, they're still faithful maps. There are still faithful depictions of the final product. Peter and Paul are both imperfect puzzles. Today we heard the story of Peter, and it's after the resurrection, and Peter's sitting on the shore of the Sea of Galilee with the resurrected Jesus, and he knows that it's Jesus at this time. He's already figured that out. But Peter is tired, and he's dirty, and he's wet, and he's been catching fish all day, and all he wants to do is sit by the fire and hang out with his friend Jesus, which is not too much to ask at the end of the day. And as he tries to warm himself over the fire at the end of this day, Jesus says to Peter, not once, not twice, 3 times, Peter, do you really love me? Now, I don't know if you've ever come home from a long day of work or a long day at school and your spouse or your parent or your sibling wants to have a really deep conversation with you about the direction of your relationship or, the mistakes you're making and how we can make, different steps. And it's the end of the day and the last thing that you want to do is have a deep conversation about anything. It's the end of the day and all you want to do is turn on basketball and watch it and zone out for a little while. This is Peter. This is the end of the day and he just wants to sit by the fire and warm his hands. And Jesus is asking him deep philosophical questions about the future. Peter, do you love me? And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Now that probably really annoyed Peter. Peter had done everything, maybe not perfect, but Peter had done everything Jesus had asked him to do during his life. And the 3 questions, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? It's an echo of that event not too long ago where somebody asked Peter if he loves Jesus and he says no, right? It's a test. Jesus says, last time somebody asked you this question, you said no. This time, do you have the right answer? It's Jesus' way of saying that even though your answer was wrong last time, even though you made the wrong choices or you made maybe not the best choices, maybe you answered the question in a different way, you're getting another chance. Jesus says, I know that you denied me, Peter, but I'm giving you another chance. Despite your bitter past, despite your imperfect temper, despite your anger management problems, I'm asking you to feed my sheep. And the same thing similarly happens with Paul. Now, Paul was the ultimate zealot, the ultimate Pharisee. He was all about church, all about the faith. He was all about doing the right things. And you could just see him being one of those people with a checklist, I didn't see so-and-so in church last week. They're off, they're out. Those people. Or so-and-so did something wrong. I'm checking them off, right? He's one of those people that he's all about purity and maintaining tradition for the sake of tradition. And he's all about being the right kind of believer. And so he goes around before his conversion seeking out the Christians who were mostly Jews, who were still in the tent with Paul, because they weren't doing it the right way. They weren't following the faith the right way. He was imprisoning people. He was literally a murderer. And that's who Jesus calls, this imperfect witness. He says, I know your past, Paul. I know your past and the mistakes you've made, and that those memories are always going to cast a shadow on you. Even when he's old, Paul, in his letter to Timothy, says, I was once a blasphemer and a prosecutor and a violent man. Paul knew that he was broken. There were pieces of his past that were missing. But just like Peter, Paul's future calling transcended all of those mistakes and transcended his imperfections. They were beyond those little mistakes, those little things, those imperfect character traits. Paul says, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me. So no matter how imperfect our puzzles, no matter how imperfect our pictures of God's future is, we should never lose hope. There's an ancient writer, his name is St. Peter of Damascus, and he says, should we fall, we should not despair, and so separate ourselves from the Lord's love. Let us always be ready to make a new start. If you fall, rise up. If you fall again, rise up again. This reminds me of my grandmother had a plaque in her kitchen. She got herself, and we went to visit her one time. It said, prayer changes things. She said it kept disappearing. She'd hang it up and it would disappear. And my grandfather, God bless him, was not big on change. He wore the same outfit every day. He did the same thing in the same order every day. He smoked exactly 2 cigarettes every day his whole entire life, just 2. He ironed his sweatshirts. I mean, he was not what you would call adaptable. And so she had this plaque, prayer changes things, and it kept disappearing. And for one time she said, do you know what's happening? And he said, oh yeah, I took it down. And she said, why, do you not like prayer? And he said, oh, I like prayer. I just don't like change. We have the opportunity now. We had what I'd like to think of as a crisis of clarity. We've been given the grace by God to have a crisis of clarity. We've been able to put things into perspective a little bit. You see, Paul, once he'd met Jesus, could no longer be comfortable in the life he once had. He was given a gift of clarity. There's not often on our faith journey and on our walks with God that we're given an opportunity for clarity, to really evaluate what it is that we're doing and how it is that we have lived our lives and the choices that we have made. And in this time, we've been given that gift, given the opportunity to open our eyes to who we have been, and to make proactive choices about who we want to be in the future. This is, in many ways, the church's road to Damascus moment. And it's our opportunity to make choices about how we want to move forward. We're told, Peter, if you really, really love Jesus, you're going to walk away from that safe harbor of the everyday and what you're used to. And you're going to go feed my sheep. We're told, like Paul, that if we're going to make changes, then we're going to have to leave that road that we journeyed on and take a different path. We've been given a choice like Ananias to move away from the safe harbor of the familiar house and go to that other house on Straight Street and meet the stranger. So to claim the gift, the grace of clarity, doesn't mean that we're prepared to go full steam ahead in another direction, or there's going to be many days when we feel like comfort, like putting on our familiar slippers is the best thing that we can do. And we like the familiar, and that's okay. But if we want to take advantage of this opportunity, if we want to move into that moment of clarity, if we want to open our eyes and see like Paul, then we have to leave our comfort zone. So we are being challenged to resist the temptation of comfort, to resist the temptation of having to have all of the answers in place before we can move, to resist the temptation to stop putting our puzzles together because it may not be perfect, or we might make a mistake. What are you going to do with your road to Damascus moment?
I will trust in you alone, higher than my sight, high above my life. I will trust in you alone. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay.